Alisa, welcome. Good to have you here. What is your current assessment of, we've heard in recent weeks about Russia making advances in the Kharkiv area and so on, the sense that maybe some of that military aid that was delayed in America has been a little bit too late in coming. What are you hearing on the ground?
Well, so the way most experts talk about this war now, it's a war of attrition, which means that if the war doesn't end within several months, it becomes not as much just about military tactics and strategy, but about the economies of both countries and the kind of large-scale management of being able to accumulate as many resources as possible for the next push and to deprive the other side of their resources. Mm-hmm. So I generally hate to take this like God's eye view, you know, top-down view on the war. But if we have to take that view, it kind of reminds of a perfect, you know, chess tournament, because each side, as we've seen it since the beginning, each side takes a turn and everybody knows whose turn this is. And then it takes some time to make the move and everybody is kind of watching and waiting for this move, right? So right now it's Russia's turn to make a move and everybody is watching and Russia is on the offensive and it's moving a little bit. I think also every time one side takes a turn, there is a lot of atmosphere and media about this side currently winning. Mm-hmm. So when it was Ukrainian counteroffensive last summer, there was this expectation that Russia will fall and Ukraine will win. And now when it's Russia's turn to go for offensive, there is this air that, oh, now Russia is winning. But I think, like, on one hand, it's been very predictable because we know who is taking turns. But on the other hand, it's been very unpredictable because every move doesn't really end the way we expect it to end. Mm-hmm. In the beginning, everybody expected Russia to just win immediately. It didn't. Then everybody expected Ukraine to win in the counteroffensive. It didn't. So maybe now that when it's Russia's time to make its move, it does not necessarily mean that Russia is going to win the whole war. We obviously hope it's not happening this way. But it's hard to say how it will end. So speaking of this war of attrition, we can say that Russia does have advantage in it because Russia is just bigger. It has more resources, more people to throw into the battle, and more territory. So, for example, Russia managed to produce its own weapons because it can be far enough where Ukraine cannot reach it. And also Ukraine has all restrictions on shooting missiles to Russian territory, while Russia can reach pretty much every target in Ukraine. So it's been much harder for Ukraine to establish production of weapons, and Ukraine largely depends on its Western partners for that. So this is where we are now, but where we will get from here, nobody knows, and I don't know either, right?
If you're drawing an analogy with a chess game where each one's taking a turn, that would suggest to me that you're seeing this as taking many years. This won't be resolved in 6 months or in 12 months. This might be 5 years. This might be 6 years. Is that how you're seeing it?
Yes, and I personally don't think it will be resolved very soon, or soon at all.
We're 2 and a bit years since the Russian invasion, 10 years though since the Russian annexation of Crimea, which I suppose really began this cycle of aggression. What is your perception of how the Ukrainian people are feeling right now? Is the mood still one of defiance, or are they feeling as though maybe sacrifices will need to be made to end this phase of the conflict, which could mean giving up land in the east particularly?
So I think something that many people outside Ukraine don't understand is that the deal of land for peace that is often offered, suggested Ukrainians should take, that it's really not on the table. And it's a non-viable deal not for Ukraine but for Russia, because this is not land that Russia wants. First of all, the land that they take, it's mostly a scorched land that they burn to ground before they take. It's more of liability than a gain. But even outside of that, Russia has never been interested in some piece of Ukrainian territory. Russia is interested in regime change in Ukraine, in having Ukraine under its control. And so I myself come from the city of Donetsk that has been occupied by Russia since 2014. And I know very well what it is like to live under Russian control. it can be most closely compared to living in North Korea or in the Soviet Union in its really bad times. So basically, for Ukrainians, it's not really a peace. It's not really something to go for. Asking how, and answering how Ukrainians feel. It's not my example. I read it somewhere on my Facebook feed. I don't remember who of my friends in Ukraine wrote this. I'm sorry if I'm citing it wrong. But imagine that you wake up one day and you have some psychopath with an axe breaking into your apartment. And first you are on adrenaline and you just manage somehow to protect your family, and to kick out the psychopath, with using whatever furniture, you can ward him off. But then imagine that the psychopath is breaking into your apartment every morning for 2 years. And then you are doing something to keep him away, but you feel really, on the one hand, you feel really desperate at that moment. On the other hand, you don't know what you can do. Because when you call 911, which we can compare, Ukrainian Western partners to, what you hear, like maybe they came to save you a few times, but what you keep hearing after those 2 years is that, but we have other things to do, and we also don't want to upset the psychopath even more because then he can come into our apartments. And can you maybe do it by yourself a little bit longer? And all these kinds of things. And then the suggestion that we get is that, maybe you can appease the psychopath if you allow him to live in your hallway instead of coming from elsewhere. So maybe if he stays just in your hallway, it will be less of a hassle. But is it really a solution to the problem to let the psychopath live in your hallway?
So you said that you lived in Donetsk for a while.
Yes.
What we often hear is that the eastern parts of Ukraine are very Russian. Just how Russian are they?
Well, so we have, in all wars and in all these cases, it's very easy to become essentializing, right? And first to say that all Ukraine is united against Russia, or to say that in Crimea or in Donbas everybody wanted Russia. There is a big diversity of opinions and positions everywhere in Ukraine, including in Donbas region where I'm from. At the time when it first happened in 2014, the local population was very divided. Nobody measured it, but just based on my experience, I would say it was close to 50-50. There were pro-Russian and pro-Ukrainian demonstrations that were taking place. And pro-Russian side of population had Russia backing them. And pro-Ukrainian side of population didn't have really anyone backing them. Because for the West, the whole thing basically only happened in 2022. Back then, we felt like nobody really cared outside of Ukraine or inside of Ukraine. Like the government in Kyiv was just in a mess after Maidan, trying to establish itself. And everybody kind of didn't really take it seriously. And so we, the pro-Ukrainian side in Donetsk, we just felt like we were left alone. It was just taken over. And then we just had to leave the city eventually because we started being arrested and harassed and all that. And so, in a way, the pro-Russian side won and became more loud and became the one monopolizing the narrative and presenting themselves as if only they represent that part of the country. And I think that by repeating that, we play into Russian propaganda, saying that, everybody in Donetsk wanted Russia. That is not true.
Alisa, what do you make of the pro-Russian sentiment that seems to be becoming increasingly popular in Republican conservative circles in the United States? We've even had senators in the last week, Tommy Tuberville, saying America provoked Russia to invade Ukraine by trying to draw Ukraine into the Western sphere of influence and away from Russia, and that we're not doing Ukraine any favours by supporting them continuing a war that will just claim more and more Ukrainian as well as Russian lives. What do you think is going on there, and how suspicious are you of Russian influence over conservative politics in the United States now?
Okay. So first of all, something I learned in these 10 years is that whatever is happening in Ukraine or elsewhere, everybody in big politics will just interpret it the way that works for them. So whether it's true to what's on the ground or not, it doesn't really make a difference because, it's just being turned around, in this way. I think that generally Russian, not to say that Russia doesn't try to mess with right-wing politics everywhere in Europe and America, but I also don't want to over-exaggerate this influence, because I think they try, but I don't think they have as much of an impact as many people would like to believe. Because I think for many Americans, it kind of absolves them of the responsibility to say that, oh, it's not people in our country, it's Putin who made Trump president in 2016. Well, guys, Russia tried to do something with that, but I'm pretty sure Trump would win without Russia as well. Yeah, I think it's about taking responsibility. I think Russia tries to influence this politics, but I don't think they have as much power or influence to kind of to give them too much credit for that.
Mm-hmm. Do you think Ukrainians feel betrayed by America's dilly-dallying when it comes to support, or do you think they're just grateful for the support they've gotten to this point?
Well, I think it's both. Of course, they're grateful for the support. Also, I think many Ukrainians don't like when the support is being framed as some kind of charity, because we should not forget that Ukraine gave up its nuclear arsenal in exchange for protection, and they didn't get this protection in 2014. And there is this kind of responsibility to actually support Ukraine. And I don't know about betrayal. I think Ukrainians are still very hopeful, but there is a lot of anxiety about help coming too late, or being not sufficient, or being inconsistent.
This week, President Zelensky's term in office officially came to an end. There are no elections, though, because, well, martial law is in place, elections are not possible. Is that going to affect the sense of his legitimacy as president of Ukraine now that he's in this sort of post-elected period, or are the Ukrainian people still firmly of the view that he's the man to lead them at this moment of crisis?
Well, I think Zelenskyy's legitimacy has suffered a lot recently, but I don't think it has much to do with the elections that cannot happen, because Ukrainians on the ground understand well that it's close to or impossible, let's say, to actually have elections under the situation, and that trying to carry out election would probably make us more vulnerable. So I don't think this is the biggest concern. But the problem with Zelenskyy, in my opinion, is that that the role of president is not as much to decide everything, but to kind of be a symbol of the country and a symbol of the situation of the country. And at the onset of the invasion, when he remained in the office and when we managed to push Russians away from Kyiv, he enjoyed tremendous popularity for what he did. And since then, things kind of went downwards, and they didn't work as well as Ukrainians hoped for. And a lot of the disappointment and a lot of the fear and all the spectrum of emotions that Ukrainians feel about that, they are being projected, rightfully so, on the president. So the worse things get, the less popular Zelenskyy is. And of course, he also contributed to that with some policies that were not very popular and didn't work very well. One of them has to do with actually with journalism and with mass media. There is this big problem that all independent Ukrainian TV channels were herded into something called United News Marathon at the beginning of the invasion, that just has to show the same package of news, basically controlled by state, about what's happening, which made sense at the beginning of the invasion, but by now it just deteriorated into this kind of low-quality state propaganda, and it's not helping morale, and it's not helping anything. And Zelenskyy is kind of standing firmly behind this policy, and it's not helping. The other thing is the mobilization laws. So under martial law in Ukraine, men of fighting age are not allowed to leave the country. And recently, this law has been tightened even more. So, for example, Ukrainian men who are already abroad now have no right for consular services and cannot apply to renew their passports and so on. And men are sometimes literally caught on the streets, and being mobilized. And this has caused a lot of dissatisfaction in the society. So I guess it's a combination of, it's very complicated topic in Ukraine now, because on the one hand you have like as a state you have to do this. Who is going to fight if all men leave and all that? On the other hand, and it's hard to make every step right and appropriate and democratic under the martial law, right? Like even the biggest democracies in the world were not so big of democracies when they were at wars. But on the other hand, of course, people feel a lot of fear and anxiety, and it adds to that. So with Zelenskyy, it's a combination of just things not going so well being projected on him, and some not very successful policies he did.
We've heard a bit in the American media about corruption in Ukraine. How big of a problem do you think it is?
Well, corruption it's not just a problem, it's kind of a part of Ukrainian reality. It's always been, and it remains so. I'm afraid that at this point, corruption is becoming kind of a justification to not really help Ukraine. And I think we should understand that these are two separate things. Yes, there is degree of corruption in Ukrainian politics. It's gotten better actually compared to 10 years or whatnot ago. But at the same time, Ukrainians are being really courageous and self-sacrificing and fighting and doing all that. And we should separate these two facts because I think there is a tendency to expect that the victim has to be perfect in all ways and highly moral, and then this victim deserves of help and empathy and everything only as long as they maintain this like holy appearance. So I often hear these impressions from like my American friends and colleagues going to Ukraine and then coming back and saying, "Oh my God, I didn't expect that, but Ukrainians they actually I heard somebody making like homophobic remark. And we are helping them." Like, yes, of course, you're helping them not because of homophobia or whatnot. You're helping them because they're fighting the war, and because we are unjustly, sorry, I forgot this word, because we are under attack. So, yes, there is corruption in Ukraine. And no, I don't think that it should impact the support to Ukraine. Ukraine should be supported because it fights this war, not because it has a perfect, perfect absence of homophobia and because it's perfectly liberal in all senses.
Alisa, my final question is about how the future looks for the people of Ukraine. Given that in this period, since Crimea happened a decade ago and since the invasion of 2 and a bit years ago, there's also been it seems from the outside, a change in Ukrainian sense of self, understanding of recent history, including the millions who died in the 1930s as a result of Russian-Soviet policies to starve the people of Ukraine during the Holodomor and so on. There's a lot of reasons for Ukrainians to hate Russians now. Whatever happens in the future, you will be neighbours, whether there is a pro-Russian government in Ukraine or not. What does that anger and resentment and knowledge of the persecution they have suffered at the hands of the Russians mean for the Ukrainian people and their own future?
Well, I can answer this question from two different positions, As a private Ukrainian citizen positioned in time right now, it seems like there is no way we can ever reconcile with Russia, and it will be impossible to live next to each other anymore. That's what many Ukrainians say. As kind of, if I assume the position of an outside observer, an aspiring scholar, from the United States, I would say that let's look at Europe. They've been murdering each other for decades, and look at them now. They live perfectly well together, right? I've been exposed a lot to former Yugoslavia. It's been just like 20, 30 years, and there is still a lot of tension. But I went last summer to Croatia, And there was just in my blog, there were tourists from all the former Yugoslavia countries getting drunk together every night, being very happy. And it seemed like there was, like 90s never happened. I know it's not that it's not true, but it seems like it's impossible to reconcile. And then you look at examples like this, and you see that sometimes it just takes a few decades. And people manage to find, especially in like next generations. Of course, it will help if something changes in Russia. And, of course, we all look at Germany, and if Russia went through such transformation as Germany did, of course, that would help. Many people say that for Russia, the war with Ukraine could be what Algerian war was for France, that it could make them realize that colonialism doesn't work anymore and you should try to do something else. So if such kind of a big shift happened in Russia, I think that would definitely help in the future for us to reconcile. But as I said, again, like as a private citizen, I cannot imagine reconciliation. As a kind of outside observer looking at the history of other cases, I see that it should be perfectly possible in theory.
That's the big picture. My final question is about the end of the war. Now, there's obviously a worst case scenario which people would prefer to avoid, but what's the best case scenario? Like I don't think anyone's expecting Ukraine to take over Russia. what's the best case scenario for how this war ends in a way that's positive for Ukraine?
Well, so Ukraine's idea of it has been the same from the beginning, is that we want Ukraine to be in the same borders as it was before 2014. And it's often described as some kind of unrealistic expectation. But for me personally, as somebody from Donetsk, and I'm not alone in this, but there are at least several million people like myself who live or their families live in the occupied territories. This is not just a matter of pride, or making a big point politically, but it's just a matter of being able to return to your home and live there. So I think it is important for Ukraine to return to its borders of pre-2014 and to be able to exist there in these borders with at least some degree of safety.
Well, Alisa Sopova, thank you very much indeed for having a fireside chat with us.
Thank you.
Thank you.